After holding former President Trump in contempt earlier this week, the judge overseeing his criminal trial in New York held another hearing today to consider doing so again. Joining us now is Cobb. He is a former assistant U.S. attorney. He also formerly served as the special counsel to the president during the Trump administration. Mr. Cobb, thank you so much for being with us. And really on that note, can the former president be compelled to stop violating his gag order, especially if he faces the prospect of more penalties?
Thank you, Nicole. Yes, he can be compelled. Obviously, the statute involved in terms of what the judge can do limits him to $1,000 fines, but it also, under these circumstances, the judge is permitted, should he so choose, to incarcerate the former president for repeated abuses, particularly of a more egregious nature. I think the argument that they had today over the 4 incidents, the accusations that he violated the order in connection with his comments about David Pecker, Mike Cohen, and the jury. I think the judge focused really on the most serious one, which is the jury and the contempt that Trump showed for the jury and the representations that he made. The judge is uniquely positioned and uniquely required to protect the jury and protect the sanctity of the trial. And I'd be shocked if the judge did not impose a penalty on that. I don't think the judge is yet prepared to put Trump in jail. I don't think the prosecutors are yet prepared to ask for that, but I do think that we're approaching that point. I think with regard to the Pecker comment, I think the government may have overreached on that. I mean, Trump clearly was reacting to a question, and he didn't say anything derogatory about Pecker, but the government's argument is that by talking about him at all, it may concern some witnesses. I think that's weak. And with regard to Cohen, it's hard to say. Cohen is such a difficult person, and Cohen has been on the attack and is talking every night on his podcast and others about Trump, and therefore, it's difficult, I'm sure, for the former president not to respond. And nothing Trump said about Cohen in terms of his being a convicted liar and a well-known liar and having lied in the recent trial where he said that he pled guilty under oath, but he wasn't really guilty. I think those are sort of undeniable facts, and less attacks than they are facts. I'm not sure what the judge will do with that, but it's certainly conceivable that he will not penalize Trump for that.
I mean, the more the former president speaks about this case, is it possible that his comments could potentially result in a mistrial?
No, I don't think that there's going to be a mistrial unless a witness comes forward after the fact or during testimony and says something about an extrajudicial comment that Trump made that had some impact on him. I don't see a mistrial as likely for anything here, but I do see the possibility that Trump would be incarcerated, however briefly, by this judge for continuing violations.
And switching over to a political question, if you will, in a recent interview with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, the former president said that he would only accept the 2024 election results, quote, if everything's honest. You recently called the former president the gravest threat to democracy. So what do you make of his remarks?
I think, he's setting the country up for, what is almost certain to happen if he loses, which is just like the last time he lost convincingly, to deny the effect of the election. Now, fortunately, this time, he's not in power and won't be able to interfere with the peaceful transition of power. But I think we all know that Trump, driven by his narcissism, does not accept bad news, rejects it, and then lies about it. And I think what he said today on that point is exactly what he will do. If he loses, he'll lie about it and insist that he won and it was rigged.
All right, Cobb, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.